Are we ready?
Whenever you're ready, Joe. Go
All right. Call the Public Works Committee meeting of October 30th at 5 o'clock to order. I guess first thing on the agenda is the open forum. Anybody here for open forum? Okay. Second thing is to approve the minutes from the July meeting. Does anybody have?
Move
Any
for
questions?
approval.
Okay,
Second.
okay. All those in favor?
All right.
All right. Number 3, the Woodseth engineering presentation. That Bill?
All right, excuse me. Good evening, everyone. So what we're here to do is talk about the city of Nisswa's infrastructure and planning, and basically discuss. Like I said, sorry. So what our objective here is, we're going to talk about the outline and the introductions. We're going to have like the key past projects, the city strategic plan, ordinances, policies, planning studies, current projects, future projects, question and answers. One thing we like to do though is kind of hold your questions till the end. And we can talk about the questions at the end of the presentation. So what we've done here is we've collaborated with the city of Nisswa to come up with a presentation team. Includes some of the staff here at Jenny and Tom Blomer. So my name is Bill Westerberg. I'm the primary city engineer with Woodseth. And we have other people that are in the room right now. I don't know how we're gonna. Yeah, all right, we have Dave Reese, who's sitting right there. He's the secondary city engineer. He's the vice president or one of the vice presidents at Woodseth. And sitting next to him is Mark Hallen. He's the retired PE. He was formerly the primary city engineer for Nisswa. And this just gives you a picture of the Baxter team of Woodseth. So we have the Baxter team. If we need assistance, we have 12 other offices that we can get people from in order to assist us with providing the services that Nisswa needs. This is just a little bit of planning and engineering history, basically how we got here, current where we are, and future of where we are going. So then we're just going to talk about some of the key past projects. And the first one to start off is the wastewater treatment facility and Mark Hallen.
All right, thanks, Bill.
Do you want to run that?
Good evening. My name is Mark Hallen. I've worked with the city since 1996 on projects. So the original facility, the wastewater facility, was constructed in 91. There's 2 primary ponds and a secondary pond that had 37 acres of irrigation area that was mainly cut through the wood strips on about an 80 or 70 acre parcel the city purchased. And the MPCA permitted capacity back at that time was 35 million gallons each year of treated wastewater. And then the city operated for about 20 years, and there was a need. What you see there is a view kind of looking towards mainly to the west. You can see the original strips cut through the woods for the irrigation system. And then the city expanded their irrigation system to 45 acres, thinned out a lot of those trees. And then off to the right of the screen, they actually cut an open field area because the MPCA wanted to see a more open areas that such as Pequot Lakes or Breezy Point was using to help with the with the irrigation. Also, biosolids were removed from cell number 1. It was operated for 20 years. There was 7-8 feet of solids in the corners of that cell. New diffusers were added. And the big thing then, it will re-permitted for an increased capacity from 35 million to a little over 45 million gallons per year as the city was growing, and they were seeing flows approaching that mid-30s at that time. Then in year 2018-19, the city went through a facility plan for their wastewater treatment facility. A lot of the current flows were reviewed. Also, Grandview had came in and started talking with planning and zoning on converting their garden course to large condominiums, homes, plus a hotel and everything. So that essentially led the city to develop a facility plan, submit it into the MPCA. And actually in the fall of 19, then the original facility plan was submitted for 65 million gallons per year, an increase from 45 to 65. But after reviewing what Grandview is doing and seeing how they were advancing, we had a council meeting here in the council, reviewed options of 65, 75, or 85 million gallons per year. They selected 75. So the facility plan was amended, submitted to the MPCA, and then they went into the design that fall of 19 with that design. So then the treatment plant started in 20 and was completed in 21. Secondary cell number 4 was added. That's what you see in the background there behind the new aeration blower building that was constructed there to house the blowers, plus aeration diffuser upgrades were done in all the cells. But then the big thing, the city, Jenny worked for quite a while on property purchases. The big thing was then expanding the irrigation area. And that was expanded then from the, a little over 45 acres in 2012 up to 75 acres here now that they've expanded. And the permitted capacity is 75 million gallons per year. Currently flows, as they were going through this, were in the high 42, 43, and that's where the flows are. This permitted capacity is intended to serve the city for the next 20 to 25 years. That's the planning period for the MPCA. And then one of the, I'll say, caveats in working with Steve Stark, the state hydrologist, the city actually permit is unique that they're allowed to apply up to 85 million on their 75 acres in any given year. Just give staff a little flexibility in the future as your flows increase. If you might want to hold some flows one fall over to the next spring, you're able to do that and actually apply at a heavier rate. So that's the history of the wastewater treatment facility here over that. Like I say, currently the city is sitting very well with treatment capacity, to handle stuff for the next 20 years. The collection system, again, the original construction happened with the treatment plant in that 1991 for the gravity system, and there were 6 or 7 lift stations were constructed. And then part of the history is, the city felt what they could afford. They built that, got it going. And then like lift station 7 on South Edna Lake, getting over to Schaefer's Corner. There were a few other city projects that were done then in 93, 95 that kind of filled out the rest of the collection system. And that was done. And then from really the next 20-year period, there were several collection system expansions and new lift stations, but those were all developer driven. From the standpoint, the city really took a step back and those all came through the, developers. And then like I say, that facility plan happened because in 2018-19, Grandview came into the city with the planning and zoning, got their approvals, and then their 5-year plan ended up taking 2 years. They built that all out in 2018, 2019. So with that happening, then the city looked at lift station 3, which serves Grandview plus everything down around Hole in the Day Bay. And, that was on the radar, but, the expansion even caused that to come along faster. To rebuild lift station 3, increase the capacity. Those pumps could only do about 165 gallons a minute. We added 100, and, they now pump at 265 gallons per minute. Plus they have a larger diameter to slow down the cycle times in the pumps. And then with that also then, lift station 3 was addressed, but then lift station 1 is on the radar here to be reconstructed here in the 2025-26 timeframe. That lift station shows its wear and tear. It's over 25 years old. Parts are to get, plus the lift station pumps. I just looked at this last weekend on their website, Guard Dog, and those pumps cycled here Saturday, Sunday, each pump anywhere between 90 and 101 times each day. And this is kind of an average flow here, not peak flows in summer, but not the slower flows. Whereas lift station 3 pumps cycle just 30, 32 times per day, 1/3 as much. And like lift stations 10 and 8, 11, 12 times a day. Just showing the starts and stops on those pumps is really taking their toll. It's just one of the items of that lift station. So again, lift station 1 here in the, this is on Tom's plan to reconstruct that lift station just to address its age and stuff. So that's the history of the collection system. So thank you for, your attention on that, and I'm gonna turn it over to Jenny here for her report.
Oh, you're okay. Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to participate in this conversation tonight. So Tom and I are going to kind of share just a couple of high points with respect to the city's strategic plan, ordinances, and policies, because a handful of things took place in the 2020 to 2022 timeframe that will really kind of set the stage for the next handful of projects that Woodseth will be discussing. So in 2021, the city council adopted a strategic plan. And it was a way to link the comprehensive plan, that 30,000-foot view vision of the city, and our annual citywide budget. And here were the goals for the strategic plan: really promoting best practices, preserving our natural resources, expanding business in an efficient, purposeful manner. One example that Mark spoke about was that Grandview expansion, and seeing that as a sort of the first step in a potential domino effect into the future of what additional business expansion will the city see within, throughout the undeveloped commercial area. Maximizing our services and revenues, and really providing a roadmap. That's kind of the cornerstone of our strategic plan, is to provide that roadmap to give us actionable items in the short and midterm to link that, again, 30,000-foot view comprehensive plan with our annual citywide budget, and how can we, bridge those together. So as I mentioned, a couple of things were updated and reviewed by the council in 2020. One of them was the sewer ordinance. I don't know if you want to just speak to the goal for that one.
Sure. So mostly what we did with the updated to the sewer ordinance was to allow for the variance in structures and more commercial development. We added metering to how we bill. And so we are now requiring all new commercial properties to meter, so that when we're billing their sewer, there's no argument, you used it, this is your sewer bill. So that was probably the biggest thing to come out of that. The other thing we did is we took a look at some of the different housing that was being built in town. And we required houses with, I believe it's 3,500 square feet, anything above that also has to meter. The way the original system was set up, a house was considered one ERC. So if you had a house on Church Street, you were paying the same amount as, say, the new Ames house across here. Didn't seem reasonable. So now the larger homes are going to be metered, and that provides a little bit more fairness there. So that was the gist of the sewer ordinance at that time, was just to update how we build to try to generate revenue for the projects that we had recently completed, and some of the new ones that we're about to do. The next item I have here is talking about road standards. So kind of along those lines, some of these things that's just the way it always was with Nisswa. Well, one of the things we had is there really wasn't a standard for private roads. So, our fire trucks are getting bigger, garbage trucks are getting bigger, there's more of that kind of traffic. We were getting a lot of complaints about people on private roads that, 20 years ago, they were built, people buy into that, and they think that, they should be getting the same services as anyone else on one of the city maintained streets. Well, that wasn't the case. So new roads that are constructed now going forward all have to meet the same road standard. And so we've provided for that. I think that will help with that. Developers who come in who would like to have private roads have to justify why it should be a private road. It's no longer just, I want a private road. You have to really strongly justify how that can be a private road. Otherwise they default as a public, which gives the residents who live on those streets access to the city's services such as plow. Yeah, I think that's the main thing that we addressed with that. We simplified it some. There's a urban section, and then there's a rural section. Most of the streets in Nisswa are rural. Urban would, as most of you are familiar, would refer to things like curb and gutter. However, if you look at some of the work that we've done on the 2025 road bond, and probably what we will do on the 26, is there are areas where we have to do a little bit of a hybrid. You know, for instance, if you're familiar with Upper Roy Lake Road, some of the topography of that dictates that we're gonna need some curb and gutter to make drainage work to, so we don't wash out the sides of the road in those areas. So you'll see curb and gutter in spots that would normally be considered rural. Yeah, I think that's the main gist of the road standards, and then it just, you know, mostly to allow for safety and, ease of maintenance for us. So, you know, we've also looked at things like pavement thicknesses and, I think we have a better product now going forward. So all the new roads are being built to that same standard. Which wasn't likely happening before, so.
And I think consistency is really some of the maybe driving part of that,
Well,
right?
Yeah, so so when I started here, there was no set plan for when to repave a street in Nisswa. It was just, well, whenever we get enough complaints, that's when we would tackle that. Well, our first step was our first run at it was to set everything onto a 40-year repavement schedule. Well, that's likely too long for most of the streets, so we've shortened that up to 30, and that's what we're operating under for 25 and 26 bond. Will it need to vary from that? Maybe. That's probably for future groups to decide if 30 is the right length. I think it'll get us at least in the ballpark. Some streets that are heavily traveled may need more. Some of them, say like Edna Lake Road, where they have a nice solid base and low traffic, may be able to go a little longer. I think they can adjust that going forward as they need to, so. But now everybody knows what to expect on their street. You know, if they can count out that it's been 28 years since the road was repaved, chances are they're gonna get a new paved road soon. I think I'll turn that over to Jenny now for the assessment policy discussion, and
Sounds
if I
great.
can add to it, I will.
Yep, please do. Thanks, Tom. And so the other item that we have during that time frame that we looked at, that the council updated, was its assessment policy and providing more specific direction and information on how utilities are to be constructed as part of new development projects, and just laying that out more clearly so that, again, we're consistent as a city in the approach, and we have conversations with developers. They know what to expect, and they can get the information ahead of time to evaluate with their projects. Part of this was because we were starting to see some interest in some commercial property in our city. And it was really, well, how does this work? And how are we going to work with these developers to make these things happen? Recognizing that utility infrastructure can be very expensive, but where does the burden lie with that? And is that should be a city share or a developer share, or is there some combined share? And so that policy does help to provide some initial direction on what that looks like. And so with that, we started talking about then planning studies, because we were seeing interest from developers. They were bringing draft ideas for development projects to us to say, would this work, and how would that impact the community, and what kind of infrastructure would be needed. The city engaged with Seth to complete some studies to help us with that future decision making. And we had a Backage Road study, a Lift Station 12 study, and a municipal water system study. And I believe I get to turn it over to Dave to talk about each one of those.
Thanks, Jenny. Good evening. So as Jenny mentioned, a lot of this work involving future planning took place in 2021. A lot of it was based on developer proposals and inquiries that were coming into the city. The majority of the proposals were taking place along Highway 371 frontage, down along the Old Sportland Corners area. So we started to take a look at how that could possibly develop. What's that look like from a city infrastructure aspect for roadways, water supply, and sanitary sewer service. So this is meant to give a possible picture that could take place over the next, again, 10, 20 years out. Everyone takes their best guess on growth and projections. How quickly development occurs is really dependent on the developers, but having a good plan in place or any plan in place is better than not, in our opinion, because it gives you options. Gives the developer options. They can see the full development potential, highest and best use of their properties, as opposed to not having any plan in place, which could severely limit what they think they can do with their properties. Okay. So the first thing we'll talk about is Package Road studies that were done, again, back in 2021. We did have one informational meeting with property owners that are in the north, I'll call it the northwest quadrant of Highway 371 and 77. So that's, we'll take a look at some maps here in a second, but we held that informational meeting with those property owners back in October of 2021. And we looked at both the east and west sides of Highway 371. So this is the northwest quadrant. It's a graphic of a possible route for a backage road. You can see 371 portion of it up in the top right corner. So this would extend all the way to Hazelwood Drive, all the way down to the south to CSAH 77. We took a look at the topography with available information and looked at a route that would be feasible based on what we know about wetlands and topography in that area, and also with some of the parcel mapping data that's available. And this is the southern portion of that possible backage road. Again, this can be modified if needed, but you need to start somewhere when you start planning. And this is a possible route that we looked at. We did get some good feedback from property owners, some that are very interested in possibilities of having a backage road. This obviously creates better access to their properties for commercial development. Also provides a good utility corridor for future extension of sanitary sewer and water if the city chooses to go down that route to serve the city with public water supply. You're familiar, I believe, with the ongoing MnDOT work along the Highway 371 corridor. The maps behind you are maps that MnDOT has been reviewing with the city to look at a long-term plan going into the future. And what we've highlighted here on this MnDOT corridor map is a possible route for the east and west side of 371 for backage roads. This includes the one that we just reviewed that goes from 77 to Hazelwood. It also includes the southwest quadrant that would go through property that the city has been completing its due diligence on a purchase of a portion of that property, approximately 70 acres. And it includes a possible route, again, on the east side of 371 that would provide access to those property owners that were seeking city input on developing their property with city services back in 2021. part of the studies that took place at that time, sanitary sewer being one of the primary needs for commercial development and density of some of the proposals that were brought past the city, including apartment buildings, hotels, things of that nature, higher density development, really rely upon sanitary sewer provided by the city. The lift station 12 study was completed, and this gives you just a brief overview of the zoning in that area, along with the proposed lift station 12 area that was right at the intersection, southern intersection to the left. Well, excuse me, just to the north of that, where there's an existing access, okay? This exhibit from the study shows how we estimated the potential flows that we'd see from this study area. We took a look at the zoning and the buildable acreages within those zoning districts, excluding wetlands, wetland information that's available. And, you know, so one of the questions is, why is it shaped like this? Why didn't you include that area? Why didn't you go further? Usually that's the question that we get. You have to draw a boundary on your planning area at some point. This is really based on, you know, what we felt was a reasonable planning area to look at, and the boundaries of it are somewhat based on the zoning districts and what's feasible to capture within the sewer shed of a singular major lift station. We all know that the capital cost of the lift station is very high, but the real cost factor comes into the perpetual maintenance, operation and maintenance of a structure like that. So you want to be able to serve the broadest area that you can with the fewest number of lift stations possible. This area we looked at has about 180 acres of buildable land. Based on the zoning, we estimated about 260 equivalent residential units could be served within that planning area. That would generate about 38,000 gallons average wet weather flow per day, with a peak instantaneous wet weather flow of 153,000. Those numbers are really just important for taking a look at sizing a lift station. But they also go to, you know, what's the capacity impact on our wastewater treatment facility. So getting to a little bit more specifics on lift station 12, looking at those types of flows, again, conceptual. We haven't done a design at this stage, but we took a look at what size of a barrel that lift station should really have. A 6-foot diameter barrel would be sufficient based on what we know today. 110 gallons per minute would be sufficient based on what we know today. And the cost of that lift station, along with access road, the bit of trunk gravity sewer that would be needed to provide collection to that lift station, along with a 6-inch force main that would proceed to the north to the southernmost existing manhole in the existing city system, would be the recommendation. The 6-inch force main is an interim force main. Again, these flows develop over time It's not going to happen tomorrow. It usually takes a number of years for that full capacity to be realized. At some point in time, we anticipate that the city would need to redirect flows because the 6-inch force main would deliver wastewater that ultimately would end up at lift station 1. Lift station 1 has the capacity to take that wastewater to a point. And then we would look at redirecting that full build out area to a larger force main that would be an 8-inch, and that would proceed to the west side of 371 and go directly up to the plant. We have looked at bringing lift station 3 together with lift station 12 and bringing that directly to the plant. That would alleviate the flows to lift station 1. And again, this may not happen for 15, 20 years, but looking out into the future, when this property fully develops, this is a feasible plan. And it utilizes your existing infrastructure that you have in place, especially for the interim growth period. And then it provides a plan for the future, to handle those future flows. Okay, let's talk a little bit about municipal water systems. So a municipal water system usually is driven again by the density and commercial development needs. Water demand really varies depending on the type of users that you have within your service area. And it also depends on other factors like fire flow and protection within commercial areas and areas that, again, have hotels, apartment buildings, things like that, that are regulated in such a way that they need to have fire protection. Looking at the demand on this area, which extends beyond the lift station 12 study area, it goes all the way up to Nisswa Main Street proper, up to the north, and serving that area as well. We looked at what the demand would possibly be. And again, this is taking a look at commercial and residential uses based on the zoning, what you have now today and what we expect to happen in the future. And we developed a average daily demand flow of around 188,000 gallons per day. Maximum demand flow or daily demand was estimated around 263,000, and the peak hourly demand around 433,000. So again, those numbers go into really taking a look at the components of a public water system, like the water tower, water treatment. When do you expect to have these demands, and how do these systems get sized properly to handle those demand periods? So for an elevated storage tank, the study recommended elevated tank having a capacity of 300,000 gallons per day. I'd say this is fairly typical for a community like Nisswa. It does take into consideration a fire flow factor. Fire flows are determined in different ways, 2-hour, 3-hour demand at different rates for different types of facilities. So you need to incorporate some storage in the tower for that. The distribution system, we expect that we'll have 8-inch, 10-inch, and 12-inch diameter water mains. involved with this system to cover the geographic area within the planning area. Again, 12-inch would be your main transmission lines, and 8-inch would be expanded out to serve Grandview and the rest of the areas along the commercial highway zoning area. Municipal water with water wells. Either you get your water supply from surface water or you get it from wells, groundwater. Personally, I'm not aware of any community that is locally taking water supply from a surface water. It's all wells. This is really dependent on the aquifer and what it can give you in terms of volume. So we took a look in the study at area water wells that have been drilled. We see many wells that can produce 300 gallons per minute. They're treating for iron and manganese mainly. So water quality is the next consideration. What would the public water supply have to treat for to provide the level of service that people would expect? Water chemistry would have to be explored with a test well. So the next step in the water planning process that we would recommend to the city would be to start looking at some possible areas for completing a test well, getting some water chemistry and getting some pumping rates so that you know what is feasible from a capacity and quality standpoint. What we find out in terms of water quality dictates what we would treat for. Hardness and softening goes into that discussion. This is a graphic from the study that shows the cross sections of the well records that we collected. Basically, it shows that there's buried aquifers in the Nisswa area that are about 130 to 160 feet in depth. That's the range. For the upper aquifer, there's actually two. There's one lower one. They may be connected at certain points. Kind of the rule of thumb, and everything is unique to the location and the geology, but kind of the one thing that sticks in my head is the deeper you go, the more mineral content that you have in your water you're going to pump, and the shallower you are, the softer the water generally tends to be, but more risky for surface contamination too. So you have to take that into account. All right, I'm gonna lead this off to Jenny so she can talk a little bit more about the property where we're looking at possible water plant.
Thanks, Dave. As the committee is familiar with, just generally speaking, as we kind of reflect on all of these different components and variables with roads, sewer, water, just utilities in general, infrastructure planning, it's, as Dave mentioned a couple times, it's really working with the best information that we have at the time that we have it and trying to be as responsive as we can be to developers and ideas that come to us to evaluate and discuss. And so something that came forward in 2023 was some property along the highway owned by Stuart Mills that was in total 134 acres. And it went on the market mid 2023. And the city council wanted to have some conversations about, is there an opportunity or a need for the city to incorporate some of this property for our own future use, whether it's for facility use or infrastructure planning, things of that nature. So the city council engaged in conversations for a good 6 to 9 month period. The council entered into a purchase agreement in May of '24. And then we spent the summer months going through a very robust due diligence process. Survey work, environmental studies were completed, wetland delineations, and an archaeological study. As part of this, Bill will talk about just the layout, and really the idea was to determine what specific property might the city need for future planning purposes, and then what portion of the property do we not need to keep, and can we really look to create development opportunities complementing that potential infrastructure development component. So Bill's just going to provide a high-level overview of the components. This isn't anything that is finalized or set in stone. It's just to provide really an estimate for our use with the bond issuance. And I just want to speak to that real quickly because the bond that will be issued for this property purchase will be split into two components. It will be the tax exempt component, which is the land that the city will retain for our needs, and then the taxable component, which will be land we will turn around and resell at some point in the future to developers. So what we keep from a city perspective can be tax exempt, and what we will look to resell would be taxable. And so that's really the high level overview of how do we lay this out and determine what the needs are for the city, and then what we might look to sell into the future. So, Bill.
So based on the information that we collected in the Alta survey and basically everything that we collected, we generated this layout showing the existing features with the archaeological area right there. And we tried to lay out, like what would be a possible path for the roadways, connecting Hazelwood into 370 or into existing Hazelwood that connects into 77, and then connecting, basically trying to connect into where MnDOT has laid out where they think the roadway should be connected in a little bit further to the west. And then we tried to align that, kind of curving that roadway down to the south for future extension to the south, and then connecting in where MnDOT proposes a connection onto 371. So once we and then we've come up with other options, but this one seems to be the one that, I don't know, probably the best option, I guess. So what we try to lay out here would be like, where like the water treatment plant would go, where the public safety building would go, and the city administration. We also tried to come up with a layout for storm sewer and where we could do some water treatment, stormwater treatment. So what we kind of came up with was putting like the water tower and the treatment plant closer to the north edge of the property. So how we came up with the property sizes is we did kind of an analysis a while back, working with different cities. Some of them already built different buildings. So we looked at the size of their community, looked at the size of their buildings, and came up with like a rough idea as to what would work for the size of a city administration, public safety building, and the water treatment plant, like the land area. And also in that little analysis, excuse me, was this possible size of the building. So that's what we tried to lay out on this drawing, would be like where these are conceptual, like we roughly, so the idea was to be able to fit it in there so that we know it would work. And then we're going to turn this back over to Mark to talk about lift station 1 rebuild.
As I mentioned earlier, just pump cycle times, age and everything. For lift station 1, that's located along Hazelwood Drive. Also the site, you got the creek crossing there, a few things constraining it. So for that lift station, I've talked to the city about, they should be looking at some future property addition, quarter acre, half acre, just to allow some more flexibility. Because in rebuilding the lift station, One, it's live. You just don't have the luxury of taking it offline for 3 weeks and constructing something, hooking back up, just like lift station 3 that was done at Grandview. The city worked out an easement, developed some additional property from Grandview. We constructed the new structure, lift station panel was in place, and then pick a day for switchover, and you bring all the flows over, start the new pumps, but keep the old lift station in place for a couple of days just in case Murphy's Law shows up and you have a component problem or something happens, and then you make the changeover, and then you do the demolition of that lift station. So that is, Tom and I just had some preliminary discussions, and that is what we would anticipate for lift station 1, is that would follow a similar scenario where rather than trying to reconstruct right in place, it would be a structure, right adjacent, but to allow that scenario. And the other aspect too, you have a lot of homes along Lake Nisswa, basements. If you try to rebuild in place, if you have problems, then you just run the risk of backing up basements. So that's the other issue that wasn't so much there for lift station 3, but it is there for lift station 1. So those are the things that the city will be looking at here, and in the next, the planning and the reconstruction phase here in 2025 and 26. Capacity wise, the lift station is really at 300 gallons per minute. It has all the capacity it needs. 6-inch force main is plenty large. It just needs the, to address some of the older components that Mike Wagner's had issues with over the years getting replacement parts for, and just the short cycle times. So, thanks, Bill.
So I guess what we're going to talk about here a little bit is the Nisswa Geographic Informational System, or GIS, and asset management. That system just came on live. Recently we had a training with, or I didn't, but with Seth, GIS had a training session with Nisswa staff, and it's up and running. And basically it just shows it. So the system is owned by the city of Nisswa. WITSEF is just helping them provide the information and adding the information that they think that, or that they contact us about to add. Right now it shows streets, utilities, signs. Well, I don't know about showing signs and street lights, but it shows, and the zoning and stuff like that. So it shows some of the basic stuff that they wanted. But we can keep adding to that. City staff can keep adding to that. In order to get as much information on there. So this is what it looks like when you open up ArcGIS. So you see on the 3 different windows there, and the comprehensive app plan, that kind of shows the, do you want to just kind of switch over to that? So this is kind of, I don't know if you've, so what you're looking at right here is the green dots are like manholes, in the city, sanitary sewer manholes. We have labels for the lift stations. We have the pipe connecting the manholes. And all of that, a lot of that is already surveyed in. So we just upload our survey points into the GIS so that we know where it is. And then you can click on manholes in order to put information in there, or Public Works can do that. And it seems pretty user friendly so far. It's just it's like I said, it's the city's own system, so they can add whatever information they want to it. Oh. So the next thing to talk about is just going to talk about some of the current projects that are going on. The Nisswa 2025 road bond, specifically the 2025 streets. the streets were identified and a conceptual scope of work was determined. We began the survey. We've surveyed pretty much most all of the streets except for a small portion of Roy Lane, just south of Upper Roy Lake Road. We're in the process of coming up with like a 30% concept plan. We've been reviewing those with the city to make sure that we're on track and on following the scope of work. Yeah, we still have the 2026 street improvements, and the other thing that we're working on is the Nisswa Park. Mainly what we're doing is we're just providing assistance to the city of Nisswa to create or help them write a grant for the outdoor recreation grant. This is a little bit more of an extensive grant application. You kind of have to have a design. There's a lot of information that you need to provide, and we're just assisting them with that. The idea is to fund a new playground and pickleball courts. This is something that was just talked about at the last city council meeting, the Nisswa City Hall. Just a brief summary, the building was built in 2005. They did a facility study in 2021. And then over the years, it was identified that they needed, that they were going to do a new project. And that project was approved, or at least the funding for that project was approved on October 2024, where High Tech Construction was selected as the general contractor. The construction project includes replacing the roof, windows, tuck pointing. Well, you can read all that stuff there. But basically, it's going to improve the building, eliminate some of the problems that they have right now. So what I did is I just threw this slide in there. It's, like there's a lot of things that are going on in the city of Nisswa, and there's a lot of funding opportunities here. Now, some of these things the city has already used, some of the things that WIDSEF has applied for grants and received. So I just put up a list of some of the things that you can get money for or from. Successfully funded projects. These are some of the projects that we've received funds from, and very similar to what we're talking about here in Nisswa. So in Dawson, $5.8 million loan, $9.7 million grant for a utility and street project. City of Isle did a water and wastewater project. I mean, they were very similar to this one, that a lot of their infrastructure was not built yet. So they kind of started from scratch. So they got almost a little over $9 million. City of Clearbrook also did a water, sewer, and street project, and we were able to get like $9.6 million. Like some of these funding things, they just make good projects affordable. It's that way, then you can do street improvements, water, wastewater, and other infrastructure projects. I just put this slide in here just to talk a little bit about us. We plan, kind of like our topic or our heading for the day, we focus on planning and engineering for rural communities. And we have good engineering expertise. We have a multidisciplinary firm of engineers, architects, surveyors, stuff like that. Regional focus, pretty much staying in Minnesota, but pretty much the whole state. And professional funding expertise, which I already explained. And now we get into the part where Q&A. So if you have any questions?
Well, I guess I'll go first. A lot of information put together. I myself know about some of these past meetings back in 2021 and some of that information and some of that. However, this question is open for anyone in this room to answer. why is there no development being done down in that current corridor?
Where's that?
The corridor that they talked about down along 371 down there, the focus of this. My question to people in this room is developers came here in 2021 to pursue that. The land, part of the land that the city is purchasing now has been for sale. Bill Brecken's in the room for 2 years, more than 2 years. More than 2 years. Still, part of it's for sale. So my question, again, to anybody in this room to answer is, why is nothing being done? Why isn't the real estate selling? Why isn't development happening down there? I mean, I know the answer. You know, the city's policies, plans, procedures, everything that's just talked about isn't affordable at any level to do it. I myself have walked the ground that's for sale down there with billionaires. They don't become billionaires because they don't know what to do with their money and what's a good buy and a good project to do. We're not gonna see development down there until we stop and take a better look at our plan put together. And until that does, I'm sorry, but all this is just, we're just wasting our time. Otherwise, that development would have already happened by now and already be happening. But it's not. It's not fundable with the current procedures and policies in place by the city. That it's not happening.
I know a couple of developers, I mean, the big reason isn't the policies. In the past, one of the developments that they've done, they've put in the roads to ordinance or municipality ordinances and specifications. From what I heard from two of them is, the lack of water for the development that they want. That was the big thing. So, but they would be okay with, in the past, in other municipalities that they've developed, they've put in the roads to the specifications, passed it on to the property that they sold. So they don't have a problem with that, but like I said, just water. Lack of.
Sure, but putting in the roads, you know, no private roads, putting in the roads up to road standards. I think in 2021, when Joe put together numbers for lift station number 12 down there, the preliminary cost was, I'd have to look back, obviously I don't have this information, was around the $600,000 to $700,000. You know, now it's at 1.17, but the price of everything's only going up, only getting more expensive. Back in 20 and 21, when developers came forward to do that, it wasn't feasible now. The price has only gotten substantially more expensive. You know, by the time you put all this infrastructure in place, no matter what building or business you put on there, you can't make your money back on it. That's why that area is sitting with probably some of the most prime real estate on the whole 371 corridor for sale for over 2 years. That is why no development's happening down there. At the end of the day, just like we had this morning with the business owners that filled every chair out there, we need to bring the developers in and ask them. I mean, you know, you can hear it from me, but apparently we need to fill all these butts with those people because it's not gonna work. The numbers don't work. It doesn't add up.
So I think we have taken opportunities on occasion, handful of times since my time in Nisswa, 2021 being one of those specifically where we've, you know, engaged directly with business owners or property owners, developers to say, come in here and share with us your feedback, your ideas, the things you're thinking about. That only helps our planning efforts to know. That is a challenge. I mean, that is a challenge, understandably, that developers don't want to put maybe all of their ideas out into the world as they're starting to evaluate them and decide maybe what community to pursue one idea or another. But that is something that we have asked in the past to try to get feedback, and we don't often get much, I think, for responses. So that is a challenge. But something for the committee, I mean, really for all committees and for the city council is to ask those questions and to say, are we happy with, as a community, are we happy with the pace of development or the growth that we're seeing? And if we're not, what adjustments can we make to that to provide some different direction or opportunities, whether that's, I mean, you think of tax increment financing, you think of other development incentives that might, maybe there's a reduction in sewer hookup fees as an example. I mean, there's ways to do that. And certainly those are things that if is this group, for example, wants to discuss and evaluate and make a recommendation to council, I think that's in part also where that starts, is to say you have the ability to do that and to provide some context to say, we'd like to see something happen here and how can we facilitate and partner in that way. So I certainly understand, because cost is certainly, I mean, that's very important, and to balance that with the developer need and with what's the right amount of burden to place on the taxpayer, and what's the payback, because maybe there is just that growth in tax base is the payback, and the community wants that as part of that investment in our future growth of the community. So I just offer that and kind of think as a committee, if that's something you would like to see go in a different direction, then what feedback can the committee provide to make that change?
Yeah, I mean, it has to. In 2021, I sat right out there at the table when we had MnDOT in here, we had the county in here, we had the city in here, we had WSN here. We were talking about that development, that kind of spurred this on down there. I was sitting at the table during the whole discussion. And at that time, MnDOT had said, if we come back to them with closing off dangerous corridors, 371 Hazelwood, for example, things like that, that there'd be funding potentially available for the backage roads around there. The month after that meeting took place at the council level, the rules changed. The very next month is when the rule changed to no private roads in the city of Nisswa, to mandating that developments like that have ability to hook up for city water, which we don't even have. There was a whole slew of rules that changed the very next month that prohibited stuff then and are still in place today that's prohibiting any of this development. At the end of the day, with anybody moving into our town, residential or business, it's always about the money. It's always about the dollar. It doesn't add up. If it doesn't add up for the dollar here, it's not going to add up for anybody. And that's the number one thing. Before we go down this thing, we got to look and completely revamp and rechange our policies and procedures in this city to do stuff. I mean, even in a corridor like that, to put a 3-story building in to have an apartment. Biggest need in this town is affordable housing. Affordable housing is apartment building. It's not allowed in the city of Nisswa. It's chicken and egg. Do we need the water tower first or what? Or the apartment building? Well, needs to be some creative solutions with that. But at the end of the day, it's all about the math, all about the money. It doesn't work. That's why the land is still sitting for sale down there, except for the north half the city's looking at buying. And that's why there's nothing else going on in that corridor or even being talked about in the corridor right now. And I mean, Bill, maybe you can speak to some of this.
Well, I think you're bringing up some really good points. I mean, the council has already made approval that they're going to purchase that land. So
Right.
that now the hard work starts. I'll agree with you on that,
Right.
Joe. The hard work's going to start with this, but it's the catalyst that's going to start. I've already got 2 parties that are already interested in purchasing commercial property in that space. So, hopefully it'll start generating some revenue as they come in too, there's assessments on those. So, but that work has to start, because we got to make sure that you do have the policies in place that we can allow that development. When that lift station gets put in, that's going to open up a lot of land for future development, you know, so because there's some parties that are interested in doing that in regards to the housing. So, I mean, it's gonna be a long term, it's gonna be a hard work, but I think once we get a couple, if we can get two people in there, two businesses in there that are already wanting to get moving on this as quickly as possible, then that's gonna create other development along that whole corridor. And even with the properties that Stuart Mills has kept in his possession, is going to be very interesting to, I think, people too. So it's really, you're lighting the fire. But now we have to make sure that we can watch it and manage it as we grow it. And the city is going to have to look at ordinances, you know, impervious coverage is going to be a factor and some of those kinds of things as well.
Yeah,
So all that's
that-
going to have to be looked at.
That's what I'm saying. That's the starting point before we get too far down this road. We have to look at our policies or
Mhm.
ordinances and stuff, because right now, the way that it's set up, it doesn't allow for businesses to come in there. I don't, you know, obviously I don't know who you're talking to, but none of that work is done at the city level to allow this, and to allow it at any sort of level that makes sense financially for anybody to look at it. That work's not done. That's the roadblock every single developer has ran into.
Right. But now the key is you open the door and you give
Sure.
the city's going to purchase this and we finalize that purchase, then the city really has to say, okay, now we have our work to do, because we're going to have to look at, like you say, ordinances and policies to be able to move that forward.
So a simple question to WSN, you know the acreage of that map for lift station number 12. We know it needs the backage roads, the infrastructure in there, right? We know how far the backage roads are mileage. We know what it costs per mile to put a road in. You have the 1.17. I would like somebody to put a number to that acreage that's circled down there and say, okay, if all this infrastructure does go into it, what does that cost per acre? You know, what would be assessed back to per acre? Does anybody have any information on that?
Not right now, but
No,
we can
but
put it together.
That would be a
Yeah,
legitimate starting point before we
Sure.
took this any farther.
yeah. So that's doing some of the hard work, the
Right.
legwork that Bill was talking about, starting the next step of planning, looking at what's this going to cost in terms of property owner share of the infrastructure cost. What's the public, the rest of the city, tax revenue going to pay for?
Right.
What can we get for funding?
Or, can we go down to like a city of Maple Grove and take a plan that they have in place for development structure and apply it here? Is it just assessments on those properties as they're sold? Is there a different way to do it? So the rest of, the city isn't covering the cost of whatever, let's say a new gas station or anything that might go down that corridor. I guess I would think that's gonna be a tough sell for the taxpayers to go, hey, you gotta cover $3 million more worth of expense to get this new gas station in town. I don't think that that's gonna fly in this city with the taxpayers. And so before we go any farther, I guess, that would be the number one question. What does that do per cost per acre? And then, obviously, we know what the city just paid per acre over there. Can we as a city get the money back out of what we're proposing to sell? Before we engage anymore with future buyers that might want that property, we have to know that information ourselves on the front end. To make this work, because if we keep 20 acres, it's roughly 70 acres, correct? So are we gonna keep 20 acres and sell 50? Is that the magic math that we need to do? Can we keep 30 and sell 40? What's the math for ourselves even to be able to keep? So I guess, I don't know. Those are my quick initial thoughts on all this. I mean, there's nothing wrong with what's presented. I think it's good. It's good to think about, but it's also a little bit of the cart before the horse again, I feel. Yeah, I mean, it's gotta be talked about, but, or the other parts of the city have to come along with it, P and Z and all this stuff, and I'm not sure that, that the city as a whole is, I don't know, up to that task, or we have the staff on hand to properly execute all this as needed.
Oh, absolutely.
And something I think to keep in mind is we have maybe two key pieces to this. We talked a lot at the beginning about the existing infrastructure, and we can't forget about that. We need to maintain it. We need to keep that running. And that has been the topic of a handful of your meetings about Lift Station 1 and the rebuild that's needed, and the committee feeling comfortable to move forward with that process and make a recommendation. So that is one component of this, is to say we need to keep the existing infrastructure in good shape, in operating order. And I think that's, a big important component for Tom and his team to have that direction, and to, if, something's brought to you, that we evaluate it and we keep the process moving from an existing infrastructure perspective. So that was one goal of today, was to hopefully give you a vision, kind of a recap of the systems we have, and what we're looking from a staff perspective to get feedback and input on for the timing of that. So that's one component, which is also as important as this planning component. And the purchase of the property is the first step. And once that's, secured, we can start to work on all of those next layers to that. So just keeping in mind, both of those things are important. And I don't know if you have any feedback on just that existing piece, but I know that's something we're really kind of concerned about.
The problem with that existing piece is what was done there when we first started talking about it is what's gonna feed into it. And so we knew from Joe DeBell's drawing that we would have to consider what Lift Station 12 would look like. But once we dove into that a little bit with this committee, they didn't feel we had a clear picture of what Lift Station 12, the area would service, what type of development would be there. I couldn't answer that question, so it kind of stalled with that. Kind of to some of Joe's points, I would say, what is the purpose of the Public Works Committee? We do figure out the roads, the water towers, sewer. But the economic piece of this, I think, belongs somewhere else in the city. There needs to be some kind of an economic development committee. This isn't that. We're not good at dealing with things such as bonds. This isn't the place for that. And, trying to figure out what developers want. Where do they come to interface with the city? If they don't come, we have no idea what to do. I don't care how rich they are. They can own half the world, but if they don't tell us what they want, we can't figure out what that is. And that's kind of where we've been, is a chicken or an egg concept here. What comes first? The developer or the city? Well, a big part of what we've been trying to do as far as Public Works is concerned, at least what I feel we've tried to do, is figure out, okay, if we had to service that piece of property, such as the mills, how would it be done? You need to know what the roads should look like, what the sewer should look like, what the water should look like, at least a generic picture of that. So we've taken a pretty good stab at that here so far. Until a developer comes along and says, I want to build a bowling alley, or I want to build I don't know, the next Disney World. We don't know. We're taking our best guess at it. So we look at generic things like residential and gas stations and stuff, and so there's a mix of it, and that's kind of what you get. I do think there's probably room for a development committee that would be comprised of representatives of in the development committee. Maybe it's real estate agents, maybe it's actual business owners. I don't know. I'm not an expert at that. And then they could feed committees such as this, or planning and zoning, tell us what they want. And, you take that Mills property and, so the things that we were looking at is, how do we tie into the MnDOT study? How do we take advantage of what they're doing? One of the things was we had to have some kind of an idea what backage roads look like. So if MnDOT, if there was money available to help construct those, we had a cost estimate where they might go, what they might serve. And so that's really what you've seen here, and that's what we've asked WIDSAT to put together. And It's tough. I mean, obviously, these things are extremely expensive and it's easy to make a mistake. But we're doing what we feel we can do. Seth provides us with, expertise on how to build these things. I think there might be somebody else that we need to employ if we want to look at the business end of this.
Yeah, the one thing I've said before. I think I had a conversation with Jenny on this, but yeah, the one thing I've always thought is in Nisswa, as it's developing, we don't have an economic development committee, which is important because we can't lay everything on E and Z, Public Works and so forth. And that I think would be an asset, especially with the future possibility of the development that will be coming in. Because you can look at that time as, you know, they'll have feedback. Should we do a partnership on, you know, when we put in infrastructure? You know, how would that look? You know, it's public, private. But I know a lot of citizens, if we start building every single road, putting in all the sewer with no assessment to the properties, that's not gonna fare well with the citizens. But where can we start at looking at an economic development committee? You know,
Yeah,
think
correct. I
one
guess
thing that we have to
that's
look
what
at.
I'm saying. You know, there's a component to the city that we're missing, you
Right.
know, from what staff can take on with doing a whole project and stuff like this and trying to sit down. This is all good information, but like Tom said, I agree, it's probably not for this group of people, and I'm in agreement with both of you. We need some sort of economic development committee board made up of people that actually know this, that can come back and give the feedback and go, hey, this is how we've done it in other towns. This is how other towns do it. This is how we can make the dollars and cents work, you know? I mean, we don't even have low, medium, and high density in this town. You know, that's a foreign concept in this town. You know, we have highway business district, but we don't have different densities right now with mixed use, really. I mean, we do a little bit in downtown across the street. We have some apartments above some of the units, but to actually put that together, to drive this, to develop this area correctly, you know, it's all missing. But then it flows into, you know, the ladder truck for the fire department. You know, there's another $1 million. All of a sudden, if we're gonna start to develop this and do it, you know, you're talking a water truck, or a fire truck at $1 million. You're talking a lift station at $1 million. You're talking millions for the roads, you know, the water tower millions. And we're going, hey, this is gonna snowball really quickly, you know? And does the city have the capacity, you know, to do this? Or is this still something that needs put on hold and pause? And we need to get $10 million built up over the next however many years before we can even kick something like this off. But once again, I don't think it's for this group. I agree. It's for an economic development committee that currently doesn't exist within the city.
Mr. Chair, I really appreciate what was presented today because, you know, sitting up here on this committee, a lot of these things we hear from month to month, but pulling them all together and to see the bigger picture was, at least for me, I appreciate it. I don't know, and I'm just speaking for myself, but as a resident of Nisswa, my biggest concern is that balance between growth and development. And that's, I think that's at the core of what we're talking about here. And essentially, my view of this is that we're an advisory body, you know, Public Works Committee. Appreciate getting the information, but I think these visionary, big picture issues, that's got to come from the city council. And I agree with you that you're getting into a realm of, you know, kind of a transition from a, I don't want to say a small town, but a progressive town to where that additional input from a group or, you know, a position with the city that's trained in economic development and you know, the financial impacts of doing what you're talking about doing here. Maybe it's time for a city council to start looking at that. But as far as this, I agree, this is not the body to be talking about a lot of these issues, even though they're much appreciated.
Yeah, I think some of the planning that we were trying to do here is get ahead a little bit. You know, there's one issue that probably most everybody's familiar with. And that's would be the northwest quadrant backage road. A few years ago, the city had an opportunity to purchase a property there that would have lent itself well to building that road at the time. And we passed on it. And largely we passed on it because we didn't have any idea where these utilities would go. And so some of this is trying to try to start to nail down where would be the ideal corridors for some of these things, placements. So that when developers come along, if we did have an economic development authority established and they started coming up with ideas for this, is what they're proposing going to be in the way of how we would best serve the community with, say, sewer extensions or water extensions. And so that's some of what we were attempting to do here. It's not perfect, but I think we're in a better position that way now than we were. We at least have some idea where this stuff is going to sit. Otherwise, we were looking back at a map from 2005 to give us, well, what might we do with that? And it was just, another concept drawing at the time. It needed to be updated. So, some of our hands were forced to, there were some inquiries into development. For instance, the Schaefers were looking at a project. Grandview's been looking at a few projects, and there's been others. And, we can't even tell them how we're going to serve them at this point because, it's too amorphous. Well, we had to come up with some ideas with that, and I think we're doing that. I think this gives you a good idea of concepts anyway, where we want to go with it. And it has to be fleshed out. So I don't know what the next step is. I couldn't tell you, but I think for public works, what we're doing makes sense.
Right. So let's just ask the question on that northwest corridor running across through there, through the land that Tom just referenced, and it comes up along the golf course there to basically go along the sewer ponds, then ultimately, is that in line with MnDOT? That's all kosher with MnDOT. Now, is MnDOT also, on the financial aspect for the city, if we were just going to start with there, is MnDOT still saying that they're gonna heavily participate in the funding of that if that intersection at Hazelwood gets shut off in 371? Where are we at with those discussions?
Go ahead.
Yep. So at the last workshop that MnDOT was here, or a couple weeks ago, we did talk about that briefly. I would say it's probably a fair statement that MnDOT's approach to funding has modified a bit. They are certainly open to those conversations, but I think it would be more of a shared cost, and there would have to be a direct benefit, as you mentioned, as an example, the closing of Hazelwood Drive as an example. I think there would have to be more substantial impacts to the Highway 371 corridor for them to engage in cost participation. So also that one property that Tom mentioned, I think the question that we're still working with MnDOT on is where is that connection for MnDOT might be further to the west now, not where that Wausau home property is located now. I think they're looking to move that further west so that there's more stacking away from the intersection. But all of those things, we've asked them, they're aware, we're interested and want to keep developing that as they develop their study. But I'm not sure exactly how much funding. I know they're open to the conversation, but there's some layers to that they will want to address with us at the time.
So what's their timeline then, like on that MnDOT?
Well, the corridor study is for a 2030 plan, but I think the answer really is that they want to be able to address primarily safety concerns, as those needs are the top priority, is to say we want to, you know, if there are safety issues, we want to have the capacity and funding in place to address those. And then they would address future improvements on a development basis, based on when developers come forward and what those needs are and impacts to the highway.
I think too, just to put a little spin on this, or what from what I've heard from them, various sources, we may have to argue a bit for how much they're gonna participate. You know, we can't just accept their first offer. Cause they'll shoot low, and they've said, you know, so they've been everywhere, all over the map as far as how much they will participate, all the way from complete to almost nothing. And so I think, you know, one of the clues, I guess, that they've given us is, you know, they'd like to establish a corridor of frontage or backage roads on both sides of 371, the length of the city, because it takes stress off of their highway. And so that's a benefit to them. We need to be able to quantify that. You know, what is that benefit worth to them? What's it worth to us? And try to get a little bit more out of it. So when they close off some of these intersections, or, you know, we're about to say construct one of the back portions of the backage road, what should their share be? We don't right now, I don't know that we could answer that for our portion. What should we expect?
So then that tied in with lift station number one, if that backage road goes in there and we see a bunch of development in there, I mean, you know, Grandview owns a bunch of land on the backside of the golf courses there, you know, where it would make another nice development. I have no idea if they're thinking about it, but back when Mark was there, that area was talked about. But is all of that calculated into the current needs of lift station number one? If something like that were to happen, that backage road goes in, and all of a sudden we see another 50, 60 home development on the one side, and the other side, you know, there's a lot of room for still commercial development through that area too. Is that accounted in with lift station number one right now for what we'd be doing?
How much extra capacity
Right.
does lift station one have to be able to take on additional load?
I think so. I think what Mark has identified is there'd be a point where we would switch from the starting point to the 6-inch force main, or we jump up to an 8-inch, and we would move it over to, I guess I've always referred to it as the easement for power that runs up to the sewer plant. I think so that's what'll happen is if these big developments were to occur, you're just gonna come to that point much sooner. But you can't, nobody in this room, I don't think, has a good idea when that transition would happen. It could be 5 years from now, it could be 25 years from now, we don't know. But I think we have at least a rough plan of when that will happen. And so I think, if Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but what believe I've heard you say is lift station one rebuilt would have the capacity to handle what lift station 12 will throw at it, probably for the foreseeable future, minus an explosion of growth. And at that point, lift station one would have that burden taken off from it, so it would still be good. We'd be running directly up to the plant with a new force main. And that's a good problem to have, because we would have the development to pay for that project at that time, if this is coming to fruition.
So what's the best time to do lift station number one, the most cost effective time? What is the timeline left on the current one? I mean, when's the drop dead date?
Well, I think we should do lift station one as soon as we can. We have set aside funds to do lift station one, you know, beginning in 25. I don't think we have to do it right away in 25. There is some time to flesh out a little bit more of these arguments and get a better picture so that you feel a little more confident in that. But I think if we're getting out past 2030 to rebuild lift station one, we're probably going to cause ourselves some heartache. I think the incentive to do it sooner, closer to 25, is some of the things that Mark was saying, and he was pointing at it in the number start and stops to the pumps because of the way the barrel is, the size of it, the depth. It has to do a lot of starts and stops compared to the closest analog we have, lift station 3. Constructing that would save us some money on maintenance, electricity, pump wear and tear. So the sooner we could do it, it would have some benefit to us. And it would allow it to better handle the additional flow of a lift station 12, say that were to be built anywhere in the next 5 to 15 years. As soon as that comes on, those starts and stops are only gonna get far more numerous. Wear and tear on it will be worse. The potential for backup would be worse. So I guess I would like to do that lift station 1 in a reasonably expedited period. We've saved money for this, at least as far as staff is concerned, and some of the council. I'm not saying all of you are aware. We have been talking about rebuilding lift station 1 for a variety of reasons. We've looked at adding its own dedicated backup generation. The issues with the pump are another thing. The operating staff that work for me have said, they're having trouble getting parts for the existing panel and some of the other components because they're obsolete now. We're able to make it work, but it would be better if we could move up to a newer generation of equipment. And so I think the best way to handle this is to do it as one big project. Now, where lift station 12 rolls into this a little bit, and trying to give the city the best bang for the buck, it sounds like we need to build a lift station 12 of some capacity in the next year or two. If we have the money set aside for a lift station 1, can we leverage that to build 2 lift stations at the same time and save ourselves some money on construction? I guess that's something that we would have to explore further. But I think we have enough time to have those conversations of, does it make sense to build a lift station 1? I think if I'm hearing you correctly, Joe, you're saying maybe we should take a step back from lift station 12. Maybe we should. Then there's other voices in here that say we need to right away. I don't know. I think that's a question the city council might have to answer.
Right. Yeah. I mean, lift station 12 still doesn't do anything for that area down there. There's still no roads for it to go underneath, all of that stuff. Great, you got a lift station down there. You still don't have the infrastructure that goes with it, And so, yeah, I think south, that's still a much bigger question, and I think it's a much bigger dollar amount than anybody knows until a full plan gets put in place for what it really does cost per acre to do down there. But yeah, lift station number 1, if there's all these issues with it and stuff, we do need to address doing it. But also too, if we're talking this backage road, in 2021, the talk of then was that backage road would go in 3 to 5 years. Well, here we are at 3 years, and we're no farther than we were at 2021. But now MnDOT's doing this, is it gaining momentum, or are we saying this is waiting for another 5 to 6 years because this is a 2030 project?
So they did say some things, that some of the concepts you see on this project might happen right away, especially the ones dedicated to safety. I think we're all a little bit familiar with the intersection near Subway.
Yep.
I'd say that's very likely to happen long before 2030. Now, they're the only ones who can answer exactly when that will happen, but so that's one example of that. I think if there were some development on any one of these quadrants where we want to place a backage road, I think that they could participate in that ahead of that schedule as well. Kind of coming back to what I was saying a little bit earlier about what's their participation level. Well, if I had to take a gut feel of, how much should their participation level be, at least as a starting point for negotiation, well, it should be at least 50-50. We are doing them a favor if we build any portion of a backage road. We are taking traffic off of 371. It is something that they're interested in doing. So we have, some opportunities here, I guess, to get some of what we are looking for around lift station 12 to make it worthwhile and to start getting the development that will make the other portions of this come to be, such as a water tower and public safety if need be. You know, some other funding mechanisms for that, you know, if you think about it a little longer, you know, we've talked many times in this city in various ways about sales tax. Well, right now, like, we know there's a moratorium on that, but that's may soon be lifted. How do we take advantage of that, with some of this infrastructure? You know, and I think that these are questions that, an economic development committee could address.
Does MinDOT give us any time frame on when they're gonna have any of the answers? Like, hey, within the next 48 months, you'll know these answers or anything like that?
I'm probably not the right one to ask about this. I would say this is probably a good question for Tom Cruikshank with MinDOT. But, I think the answers, some of these answers are gonna come up pretty soon. I mean, as soon as this is settled, I think they're gonna start putting, a timeline to the projects, start developing the projects to come from this.
After that meeting with MinDOT, when they came up here, with that workshop, after the meeting, I kind of pressed some of the guys from MinDOT outside. I said, when are we looking at starting this? Because they at one time said 2030. Two of them said to me, I wouldn't be driving, I'd find a different way around Brainerd and Baxter in 27, 28, because that's when they want to start that overpass, that area there with 37210. And they said, they're looking at forecasting 2030, 2031 to finish the rest of it from that point up. They just have to work out some things. But they also said too, I think Tom addressed this. They might address some of the safety issues before that in that other area. I mean, from 27 to 2030. But that's an up in the air timeline, but you know, usually when they say that, they do, because they have to have that information in by spring of 2025 to the state as to when they're gonna do it.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. And I mean, I think that, you know, everything that we talked about, everything that was presented here is good information to have. It's good to have at a high level. You know, nobody knows if it's gonna happen in 2 years or 20 years. But yeah, I guess the information I know tonight is, you know, I feel like the city probably has work to do with, you know, the economic development committee, putting something like that together. And then also, you know, maybe getting some more information on the funding, the dollars, truly what the project costs. If it's at developer's expense or at the city's expense or a combination, you know, until we have more numbers put together, I don't know that anybody can really make a decision. But lift station number 1, I don't know if any of you guys have an opinion on when that should start or feedback for Tom on that. I guess if the money's set aside, the longer we wait, the more expensive it's gonna get. It's just, we don't wanna put it in and 2 years later tear it out and have to redo it either. So I don't know what the best call is, but just from 21 to 22, the preliminary numbers on 12 looks like it's not quite doubled, but almost in cost.
Tom, for the obsolescence issue that you're looking at for lift station number 1, is that a mechanical or electrical obsolescence issue?
A lot of it's electrical, but there's some mechanical things. It's not so much that it's obsolete mechanically, but it's wore out. You know, for instance, the concrete barrel, you know, was built in 1991. You know, effects of hydrogen sulfide over that amount of time, you know, it's weakened if nothing else. Knowing that we need to upgrade a lot of the other components of it, you know, you're wise to upgrade the entire thing. I don't think anything is gonna fall apart tomorrow. We have ways of keeping it running. But the longer we do that, sooner or later, there'll be a major malfunction or failure that forces us to do this in more of an emergency way.
Which is gonna cost a lot.
So I think it's wise for us to have a plan and stay ahead of these things. We are working on, we did lift station 3. We're currently talking about doing lift station 1. We're gonna do something similar for the remaining lift stations in the city to try to get them more into a, much like with our roads, how we have them on a 30-year plan, we're gonna try to do something similar for the lift stations so that they're being renewed, if you will, what's needed for them to be renewed on a regular basis. Now, the thing that's making this thing more complicated and a little bit controversial is all the development, all the added flow we want to put on something like this. In some areas of the city, you won't have that, and so this conversation will be pretty quick and easy. This just happens to be one of the 2 main lift stations in the city.
Great.
And so there's a lot tied to it, but in my eyes, it's a tool that we can use, to help facilitate the expansion of the city to the south. But once that is underway, we have another way of handling that sewer. So lift station 1, once it's rebuilt, it can stay this size for a very long time. And so why not have it reliable? Especially if we are gonna push flow to it from a lift station 12. And so, when we were first talking about this at the last meeting where some of this became a little bit of a controversy, I couldn't answer the question for you. Well, how much flow is gonna come off of lift station 12? And why, how big should this lift station 1 be? Maybe I didn't understand it well enough either at that point, but, after having long conversations with Mark, I feel like, well, no, we really shouldn't be concerned about that. Once we hit this transition point, that flow will get moved over to a dedicated line going directly to the sewer plant. Lift station 1 would go back to serving largely what it does today. And it'll be good for a long time because the other areas that are feeding lift station 1 aren't growing very fast. There's no big areas of property that can come back and feed lift station 1 that seem to be of interest to developers at this time.
So Tom, you have the money set aside for the improvements. Has the city council made any decisions on whether that goes ahead in this coming year or not?
No, we're looking for that recommendation from this committee. So that's why we were talking about it last month.
Yeah.
And we just couldn't arrive at a consensus on what the recommendation should be.
Okay.
Because we had some questions about, well, how does lift station 12 impact this? What are property purchases gonna be for this? Do we do the 2 lift stations together? We didn't know what lift station 12 was gonna serve. We had some questions about the property that the city had just purchased from Mr. Mills. What's that gonna be? What's going, what are even the first things that may go there? We didn't know that as a group. I think some of those questions should still be answered for lift station 12. We need to have a better picture of that before I would recommend proceeding with a lift station 12. But I do think lift station 1, we could probably start looking at that. And the only question I would say there for this committee would be, does it make sense for us to tie the construction of lift station 1 and 12 together in one project, or just do lift station 1 and let lift station 12 stand alone? And so I think this will come back at probably our meeting, I would guess in January at the earliest, but probably somewhere between January and March, we would want to look at what are we building in 25 and 26, lift station 1 or lift station 1 and 12, and then start looking at the parameters of those, how much bigger, things like that.
What would be the potential downside to isolating the 2 and not building them together, or just go ahead and move
Just
forward with?
Little extra cost,
Quantities.
I think.
How much extra cost are we talking about?
I couldn't answer that. It would be an economy of scale. So say you were a contractor and you were building lift stations. If you could build 2 of them instead of 1,
Great.
how much better of a bid could you throw out there for building 2 at the same time versus 1?
Right, but if you did 1 now and let's say you did 1 now and 12 in 3 years, are you gonna save any money by waiting 3 years to do number one versus having them done separately? Because the cost of number one is just gonna go up if we put it off for 3 years. So I guess to me, I don't see the point in continuing to put out number one when there's a potential that if it fails, we could be looking at huge problems.
Tom, has anybody put a pencil to the cost of that western one, that one you're talking about in the future? Has anybody
Oh.
costed that out?
No, we haven't put together a project to actually estimate. So what you're asking me, correct me if I'm wrong, Dale, is, okay, so when we hit this critical point with lift station 12 and it has to go into its own force main.
Hmm.
So there would be the construction of that force main, and then the other component to that, which affects lift station 3, is lift station 7 currently goes down to lift station 3, and then is pumped back up to the plant. When this conversion for lift station 12 occurs and we go to its dedicated force main, lift station 7 will also tie into that dedicated force main at that time. That'll be one project. That'll give us more capacity on lift station 3 and push everything up to this new force main.
Well, lift station one is gonna be expensive due to the location and so on.
I agree.
That's why I'm wondering if anybody has really figured out what it would cost to go initially west on this when you're the dedicated one.
We
You
have
know, that's
not,
gonna eventually take over everything,
it
all
will.
the new stuff. Yeah.
Yes. We have not looked at it that way. I mean, that just hasn't been how we've looked at it, I guess. I think that it might be cost prohibitive, but maybe Mark would have some insight on it as far as why
Well,
it makes more
wouldn't-
sense to go to the station 1 for a short time versus building that dedicated force main now. And my guess is it's probably a lot more than the $1 million.
Shouldn't be hard to figure out, though.
Probably not.
That's why I thought, they should look into that as part of the whole study. Because lift station one is going to really be an expensive proposition due to the location.
I think maybe Dave could have some insight.
Yeah, you're talking about costing out the 8-inch force main from lift station 12 all the way up to the wastewater treatment facility. And the thing is you gotta have some flow to fill that 8-inch force main. And the 38,000 gallons per day that we talked about, that we figure will be generated, that may not happen for 15 years. That sewage in that
Too
force
big a
main
force main.
is going to
Yeah.
be pretty rank by the
Mhm.
time it comes out the other end. It's gonna be completely septic, and that's why we're looking at the interim measure, a 6-inch force main. Sure, we can cost out the 8-inch, so that you have that information, but we wouldn't recommend building that immediately.
What is the life expectancy of the force main on lift station one?
The force main should last, another, well beyond 20 years, with the type of material for the force mains.
So it's 35 years old now.
Mhm.
Yeah. So that would be another expensive proposition if that had to be replaced.
If the force main needed to be replaced.
Pardon?
The existing force main from lift
Yeah.
station 1.
Yeah.
HDPE, 6-inch force main. We're looking at, synthetic plastic, pipe materials lasting well beyond 70, 80 years. So, unless there's something super abrasive that you're getting in your lift stations that's maybe causing a problem that way. We've even seen ductile iron pipe that have worn through, and failed.
Yeah. So
But-
that's well beyond 50 years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do we do now?
Well, I guess, this was an informational meeting, so you kind of knew where everything was. I think what we'll be doing in our next Public Works meeting when it happens is we're gonna discuss more of the details with lift station one. The actual costs, and we'll probably start diving into that. And then, figuring out a when for that to happen. Lift station 12 would probably remain separated. We probably won't consider this as a dual project right now, unless something changes. If there's some information that comes forward that tells me that we have to build a lift station 12 in 2026 or 27, well, then I would probably still recommend, well, let's consider these together. The reason being is the money that we've set aside to rebuild lift station 1 could help fund the bond for the two of them together.
With that, Bill, you mentioned that there'd be a couple potential things going in down there. What's stopping them from going in now, or what stopped them from buying the property before the city bought it? Why all of a sudden now, or you just did a good job and dug some people up in a short period of time, like.
I'm good at what I do. No.
Right.
I think that, what the city's doing in starting the movement, that's creating the interest. And so you're the catalyst to do that. Yes, you're kind of becoming the developer. And so I think that you have to, that's the part that's looking at it. And I think that the Nisswa is going to grow in spite of itself, and you're right about the planning, and you're right about, we got to get into the policies and get that all in line. But the movement's coming. And so I think
Right.
you're prepared, but when you own the land, you're in control. And that's where this is just opening the door so that developers can come, or individual investors can come and start moving forward with it.
So with that, just the potentials that you have, are they looking at doing something in the next year, 2 years, 5 years?
I think they would like to do something as early as 2026. And start moving with that. The other thing, a little bit, being my experience with county commissioner too, we can look at all the costs on this, and you're right, and government moves slow. And this developments can move, can move fast and slow down and kind of adjust like that. But the one thing that I don't think that we always put enough emphasis in, because I think we talked about 200 and some homes, the potential that these lift stations are going to do. The money that, when this gets developed, the money's forever. That's one thing we have to think about, is that if they develop a housing development down there, if we get in, commercial development on that, it's forever. And we don't look at what the income and the potential is for our tax base to spread out for the local residents. Yeah, if we look at short term and we look at all these extra costs, yes, it's going to add up. It's a lot. But again, if we can look at it long term and say, as we do this, we're going to recoup this money, and it's going to come to the city forever. It's going to outlive you. And that's going to be, again, the benefit of what you're proposing. And that's the compliments that the city council has been getting, is that it's the vision that you've got. It's the courage to move with this, because city council members are going to lose their positions by what the community is going to see, because they're going to see it differently. They're going to see what it costs us and that. But there's the upside is, what's the tax base going to generate out of this?
Yeah, I agree. And that's why we need that economic development committee, or, other people on staff that has expertise in this area. But with that being said, my question, that also is going to impact, do we do station 1 or 12 at the same time? Well, if you say, hey, there's a couple of people that are seriously interested in this in 26, well, then that helps answer that question, where it's just, yeah, then we would do them at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, the
Because
only
we
thing
can't do that without it.
the only thing more sure would be if they actually stopped in and talked to Steven for an application. We don't have those,
Right.
that's what's missing for our part of it. as staff, we've talked a little bit of, we have the 4 quadrants, and it is quite a bit of infrastructure to be looking at as far as cost and what do you do? To kind of limit our exposure a little bit, well, maybe you pick one of those 4 quadrants. Right now, the city is somewhat committed to that southwest quadrant. So that's the first one. So once you know that you can recover your costs there, you prioritize one of the other 3, and that's one way to look at it. But these are kind of things that you would get out of this economic development, I think is, I think I've talked to you
Right.
about the city
Yeah,
of
we've talked
Hutchinson,
about it. Yep.
there's, their city is more of a normal shape, I guess, it's more, there's no limiting factors like lakes around it, so it's like layers of an onion for them. And so the way their economic development works is as they're developing this ring, it's providing money to develop the next one and so on and so forth. And so they have it planned out that way. I think out to like 25 years or more. We can do that too. It just might look a little different.
Yeah, and that's where, I don't know, maybe that's where the council needs to talk about either A, getting somebody on staff with some expertise like that, or B, figuring out how to put together a group to figure this out.
One thing that's kind of pushed the city around a little bit is every time a larger developer comes along, they're not looking at that area that we were ready to work on. So we're ready, say in this southwest quadrant, but you'll get somebody large enough, they'll come along and say, well, I'd rather be up there in this northeast. I got a project that I'd like to do there. So we right away try to accommodate them. Well, it might be a situation where, okay, we're already committed here into the southwest. The northeast has got to wait until this has, validated itself. It might leapfrog the other 2 then. But I think we got to be prepared to say, okay, Mr. Developer, this isn't where we prioritized our development at this time. If you want to do that, you're going to have to take on additional risk for the cost of the infrastructure.
Yeah, that's where the policy's gotta change within the city.
That's how they do it down in the cities. The sewer rate.
Well, other than that, any other questions, comments? Thanks to WSN for the presentation. I think it's useful, helpful for the city. I almost wish it was for the council, maybe though too, instead of just this group.
Certainly could be another workshop.
Right, I mean, but seriously, I think that's where a lot, this information has to go to all, to all those people. So at some point. Maybe they'll just watch the meeting, but. Anybody else have anything else?
Yeah, there are no decisions we have to make. This meeting was strictly about the presentation, just for background information, trying to set us up for our next series of meetings going into 2025, so. I think the other thing you could expect for there is we'll start talking more about the 26, which might be becoming a 27 road bond. Based on some things that we talked about this morning at the business development meeting, master plan, so.
Yeah, the only other thing, if you all were able to put together some math based upon the package roads that are going through those different corridors with the cost of lift station number 12 and that area down there, what would the cost per acre or some sort of equivalent be? So everybody kind of knows or sees that. Not that it's for this group, but the council and everyone in the community, I think, would be interested in knowing that information. That might help spur development too, if people actually knew what the real current number for that would be. So, other than that, anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
Oh. So Kiki just asked me to check in with you. Our next scheduled meeting is on November 27th, but that's the day before Thanksgiving. Do we want to continue with it on that day, or would you like to move it?
I would say that we'd move it.
Yeah, I'll be out of town.
The only feedback I have is that you sent out notices to.
Oh, that's
the
right. Yes, I apologize.
Road
Yes.
impact people, so you'd have to send out another one real quick if you want to change the date.
We have on the 27th also, which I did not put into this packet, is that we would have an open house for the 25 road bond.
We'd have a potluck. Like a little pre-Thanksgiving warm up.
I can see what I can do. So maybe just a quick head count, who will be able to make it for the 27th?
Nope.
27?
Did you say who will or will not?
Will.
Oh, will. You can make it, Joe. Pardon?
I'm out of
You can
town.
make it, Joe, or,
I can make it,
okay,
but, yeah.
so yeah, can you make it?
I'm out of town.
Yeah, I'm gonna be out of town on the road too.
I'm not sure about Cam. Well, I'm not sure how we will proceed with that meeting. If we can't generate a quorum, we will attempt to find out what Cam's plans are.
How about the week before? 20th.
I think if we can't make it work on this date, and maybe Jenny, you can correct me if I'm wrong, if we can't make it work on this date, we would have to renotice that public information meeting, so it'd probably be likely into December.
I think the question is, I mean, it certainly doesn't have to be an official Public Works Committee meeting. It's an informational meeting that can just be something that just
Like-
brainstorming where with Seth and you're just really introducing the roads and the design. I mean, ideally, we want the committee to be a part of that, but I think maybe thinking about that for a little bit and seeing if Cam isn't available to have a quorum, do you want to proceed because it was noticed? And we just, that's the date and who can come, or do you want to adjust? So I think.
I'm
maybe
fine
there's-
with providing the information. I think between Bill and myself, we can address concerns with the 25 road bond. I think really what people are gonna be interested in is, well, what are you doing with my road? What's it gonna cost?
Yeah.
And I think we can answer those questions. This committee doesn't need to make a decision of any kind regarding that at that point. So any of you that could make it, it'd be great. If you can't, we'll carry on with the meeting and as planned and go from there.
I can phone it, but I won't be here physically.
Okay. We'll definitely have a Zoom option if you can make it that way.
Yeah.
Otherwise, I guess, do any of you have any concerns or questions before we move to adjourn?
Anybody want to make a motion to adjourn?
Yeah, I'll make the motion.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Gentlemen?